Hey guys, welcome to another video. Wanted to show you a little bit of my sketching and thumbnailing process before we got into today's piece. This is how I like to start a lot of pieces, just with a bunch of little scribbles to kind of lay out the composition and values a tiny bit so I know what I'm going to be doing before I get started. And one of the biggest reasons this is so helpful for me is that it allows me to kind of compose the piece and know what I'm going to do beforehand. So if I want to sketch directly onto my watercolor paper, I feel a little bit more confident doing that, as opposed to having to create a bigger version that I then have to lightbox. And I do like using my lightbox to transfer sketches onto watercolor paper, but sometimes, especially when I'm not planning to do any fancy line work, it's nice to be able to kind of jump right into working on the watercolor paper without, not knowing what I'm doing and then feeling like I have to erase a bunch on the watercolor paper, which is not really good for the paper and can affect the way that it takes up water. So for this one, still kind of in our week of portraits this week. So there's a figure, but it's a little bit different because I wanted to do something that was a little bit more, just a tiny bit more environmental and a tiny bit more of something with an interactive background. Not really interactive, but just something where the character and the background seem to go together a little bit better. So my original goal was to kind of blend in these greens and yellows on the figure before I started painting the skin color, and then laying in some sort of skin tones on top of that, with the goal that the character would then blend more into the background. And I also tried to keep this one a little bit simpler as far as the number of colors that I was putting on this piece, just because, and the amount of time I was spending on the figure herself. Just because I spend so much time sometimes on pieces. Like, my last two portraits have taken me way longer than I anticipated, which is great when I am, dedicating more time to working on stuff. But part of the purpose of this daily challenge has just been to create illustrations in shorter amounts of time. So I was trying to kind of get back to that today and work with more wet on wet techniques and using water to manipulate the paint more, which is what you're seeing here. Just kind of laying down some paint around the edges and then getting that wet to kind of move it and get some light color across the skin overall. And I think that works really well. I've also been experimenting lately with adding a brown color, like a raw umber or something like that, and mixing in a little bit of brown with my red for like blushes or shadows. I really want to experiment more with warmer shadows instead of, I know I normally like to use purple, we talked about that a little bit, but I want to experiment with how different colors for shadows can create different moods and different atmospheres. And I was going for just something warmer, like a spring, summer sort of atmosphere for this one. And it definitely took less time, this piece, and that was really nice, even though it was still on a big piece of watercolor paper. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It was nice to do something a little bit looser and, something with the intention of taking less time. One thing I'm excited to talk to you guys about is the use of references. So I know we didn't get into that earlier in the video, but using references for your art can be a good thing or it can be a damaging thing. So you may notice that my last few portraits have been slightly more realistic instead of stylized, this one included. And it has to do a lot with the fact that I have been using references. And of course, using a reference is an amazing thing because it helps you to better represent accurate proportions and to, get those things more accurate and anatomy and have something to look at. And there's nothing wrong with using references. It's an amazing tool and everyone should be using it to learn, especially in terms of the human figure and anatomy. But the damaging effect of using reference in a lot of cases can actually be that or at least I know I do this, I get too focused on reproducing the reference, and sometimes it's easy to forget about stylizing or being adventurous with changing the colors, or changing the figure so it doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the reference. And that's something I'd like to break out of more. And a good way to avoid that is to use multiple references, or only use your reference for the initial sketching phase. That can be a good idea too. So I just wanted to briefly talk about references just a little bit today. Overall, it was a nice piece, a lighter piece, and I really enjoyed some of the texture that I was able to get with my watercolors. So some of the spreading and the way the colors interacted with each other, I was able to just enjoy the watercolors themselves a little bit more today, because I was keeping it light and keeping it easy and keeping it quicker. And I also really like some of the loose edges for this painting, how it doesn't necessarily have crisp lines around the outside. It just kind of ends in places and has, places that stick out a little bit more. And I like that. So it was fun. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I will see you tomorrow. I have no idea what we're going to paint, but it'll be fun. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.